All right, so welcome everyone to the first of the NorCal FTC town hall meetings. We thought it was important to take a little bit of time to share what we know. I know this is an unusual time we're all living through right now, and we wanted to try to give everybody as much information as we can. And with that, I'm just going to get diving right into it. I want to save as much time as we can for what questions we can answer. On the call with me tonight, I have Diane France and Jill Wilker. They represent the rest of the Playing and Learning FTC staff. We also have a new role this year. First has asked all regions to identify a regional judge advisor. Annika Green has graciously offered to accept that responsibility. She's likely going to end up being quiet. There's not a lot to share yet about judging. Additionally, I've got my two regional head referees, Rick Swan on the call with us, and then a couple of key technical resources, Bob France, Mitch Lichtenberg. Again, they're listening mostly. This is all going to be learning opportunity for them as well. We additionally have, as I've been looking at the attendee list, a bunch of our qualifier hosts. And so that's really a very good thing. A couple of quick ground rules. Everybody's currently muted, and we're going to stay that way. What we'd like you to do is ask your questions via the question function, not the chat, the question functions. We will capture all the questions, and if the questions don't all get answered tonight, we will answer them and post the answers on our website. And we are recording this session this evening. So wanted to start off with a little bit about what we know. We know this is a challenging time for everybody. There's a lot going on and the world is disrupted. It's also a really pretty challenging time for all of us that are trying to figure out how to plan the events that sort of celebrate what all the teams in our region accomplish. It looks like right now, most, if not all of the schools in the region will be beginning their school year with remote instruction. That's going to put a lot of pressure on what we do. There is still a very strong desire for across the entire country and across the entire world to have some sort of a first experience for as many teams as we can accommodate. And the last thing we know, First Tech Challenge has actually spent some time to develop a remote event model, sort of a modified version of a normal qualifying tournament that will allow us to give at least some sort of experience to everybody. And we can talk a little bit about what we know. There's a little bit in part 1 of the game manual. It's a special version of part 1 called Game Manual Part 1 Remote Events. It's currently up on the FIRST website. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, I would encourage you to. Recognize that a lot of the information there is in skeleton form, but at least gives you a starting point on where things are going to be going. On September 12th, when the season is kicked off, there will be a Game Manual Part 2 that is also specific to remote events. So obviously there's going to have to be some changes, and Game Manual Part 2 remote events will describe how the game will play for the remote events. Things we don't know. We have no way right now of knowing when we would be able to access any of the facilities we've used in past years to allow for the potential for hosting of in-person events. We don't know what kind of constraints there's going to be on gatherings, if and when gatherings even start to begin to be allowed again. Right? Are there going to be requirements that we have to be smaller, more distant? So there's going to be a lot of learning as we go. We don't have any details yet on the scoring software that's going to be a critical part in part of the remote event experience. And there's not any real information yet on how the judging will work in this remote event world. So these are things that we will share as we learn them. Right? The goal is to try to start feeding out information as it becomes available. So though a couple of these things, you're just going to have to stay tuned and wait for updates. Just as a quick what to expect for the coming year, we are currently planning to start our season with remote events. Sort of the underlying goal is to adapt as the opportunities and options allow. We're hoping to end our season with a traditional championship, but that depends very heavily on how the next few months go, right? And what the city, county, state, and federal guidelines are for events of any magnitude. We are expecting that the registration process will likely be very similar, if not identical, to prior seasons. We are going to be having to adapt depending upon how things go again. So currently our plan, November and December qualifying tournaments are all going to be held as remote events. We're intending to reevaluate that shortly before we begin the registration for January and February events. So that would be early December. That will give us an opportunity to shift if we are allowed to. Our hope is that January, February can be a mix of remote and traditional events. We recognize that some school districts may still be in a locked down mode and traditional events may not be an option. So that we're anticipating the need to potentially some more, even if we get some sites to allow us to do traditional events, we're anticipating a need to support both. And again, a lot of that depends on how that evaluation goes in early December. Traditional championship, if possible, shooting for the same time frame as we've done in years past, late February or early March. We are anticipating that if we do get to do traditional events, that there may be some modifications to how they operate. Examples of things that have been talked about amongst the FTC partner community is maybe we have to put limits on audiences. Maybe there can't be an audience. Maybe there only can be an audience of a small number. Maybe we have to put limits on the number of teams that could be at an event. We might have to shrink our events and do more of them. Maybe we have to put a limit on the number of team members that can come to an event, right? So maybe you can't bring your entire 15-member team. Maybe you can only bring those that are needed to do the robot portion. Maybe the whole 15 can go to the judging portion. So there's a lot of potential for modification that we may be required to do. And our intention is to try to pay attention to what's going on and where the guidances are from all the local organizations. So everybody's probably going, what is a remote event? I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into it. I would really suggest going and looking through part 1 of the game manual for remote events. In short, a remote event is an event restructured for social distancing. The robot game in the remote event will be designed to be played by a single team on a less than whole field with some modified game rules. There will not be volunteer officials at that event. Teams will be responsible for officiating the match. Teams will upload their scores to the cloud via the scorekeeping application. They will have 1 week to submit 6 scored qualifying matches. We're anticipating that judging will be done via remote live interviews with the judges. It's likely going to be scheduled, and it's likely going to be the day of the event, right? So our events will still have a calendar to them. So it's going to be, the first Saturday in November. That'll be an event day. So that'll be the day that the judging interviews would be scheduled. And then we're going to try to, as much as possible, to have a traditional award ceremony. All of the same awards are going to be given. We've had some success in doing this with First Lego League Junior. And so we're anticipating trying to do as much as we can still to celebrate. And awards would be shipped to the teams after the event. So there's a whole lot of things that you as teams can start thinking about to be ready. In terms of the judging process, thinking about having an online engineering notebook kind of makes sense this year. The easiest way to let the judges be able to see what you've accomplished through the season is by giving them as much access to the notebook as you can, right? So an online digital notebook may make a lot of sense. Having a good team photograph, having a good robot photograph, it allows the judges, as they're looking at your notebook, to be able to associate and understand more with you, about you. For all you coaches and mentors out there, team rosters are still going to be a requirement for every event. I would strongly recommend everybody, as much as possible, to get all your team members to do the online consent and release forms, have their parents work and get that all done. That allows you to upload one PDF file that effectively can be downloaded directly from FIRST as part of the roster submission. Otherwise, you're going to be needing to scan a whole lot of consent and release forms from your team members. And then field access. What kind of access does your team have to a field? Do you have a field perimeter? Do you have playing field tiles, right? You're going to need to be able to not just practice, but for November and December, you're going to need to be able to play a match on something that represents a reasonable partial field. So start to think about what that means for your team. Other things you can do to be ready. Video. Do you have access to video cameras? Can you shoot good videos of your robot? I would strongly suggest everybody identify a resource for being able to share videos, and then spending some time practicing taking videos of robot matches. I know it's early to think about that right now, but you can still drive last year's robot if you've got it. Other thing to do is, as soon as the tools are identified for all the video conferencing, spend a little bit of time and practice with them, right? Work with your team. It's likely that your team is not going to be able to meet as a unit. How are you going to deal with the distributed judging interview? And make sure that all of the people that are going to be part of the stream have good bandwidth. I see one question that's an important one that I kind of forgot to do. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mark Edelman, one of the founders of Playing at Learning, and am the program delivery partner for FIRST Tech Challenge here in Northern California. By way of confession, I'm also part of the game design committee for FIRST Tech Challenge, so I help with the development of the game annually, and I am also the global head referee for the program. So sorry about forgetting that. Just trying to save time for questions as we get to them. So for teams that don't have good playing field setups, Playing at Learning every year takes and basically renews all the fields we use right before the championship. So every year I have 4 fields worth of tiles that can be passed on to teams. So we can split them up into partial field sets and help get them into the hands of teams. We do ask a small fee per tile. It's one of the ways that we help continue to support the programs. Sort of allows us to recycle the funds we spend. We are anticipating doing some sort of a drop-in access to a field at the play space. That's our building in San Jose. We don't have details on it yet, but it would be by appointment only. It would be time limited, and it would be solely to run your 6 qualifying matches for an event that you're attending that week. So the idea is that if we can use the resource to help support teams that don't have space, don't have a place, don't have access to a field, it seems to make sense. But as I mentioned, we don't have details on this finalized yet. There's a lot we need to work through. Much of it depends upon the rules that particularly the County of Santa Clara has for how we deal with the public. We are exploring the possibility of trying to have other similar hosted kind of shared fields in other locations. If you think you have a space and might be willing and able, I would ask that you please contact us. We want to spend a little bit of time to make sure that it's being done properly. As an example, we don't think showing up to somebody's house and going into their garage is necessarily a good model. Might make people uncomfortable, and we want to make sure that what we're setting up truly supports the community well. We're anticipating setting up, one of the things that happens a lot of times at qualifying tournaments is you all as teams get an opportunity to talk to inspectors, FTAs, CSAs, referees, and learn a lot about your robot, how to make your robot more robust, your robot fitting within the robot construction rules, how to play the game, how to interpret the game rules. So without actually being able to interact with those volunteers at an event, that learning opportunity is lost. And so what we're anticipating is trying to set up ask an expert kind of office hours with different functions available on different evenings, basically, to still provide some of that opportunity. We are also anticipating running some sessions on the remote systems, right? So there's going to be some sort of the scoring software, helping everybody understand how to work with it, how to use it, and how to make it work well for you while you're doing your match scorings. And then also whatever system gets selected for doing the judging interviews, right? So there's a video conferencing system that's going to be part of that. We want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with it so that the technology does not get in the way of any of the team's experiences and conversations with the judges. So there was one thing I mentioned in the quick description of the remote events, and that's that the teams aren't going to have officials there and are going to be responsible for officiating it. One of the questions that brings up is transparency. So currently, FIRST is not going to require teams to post videos as part of the process. We would like to encourage all the Northern California teams to take it one step further and to think about it as a personal responsibility of your team, right? To be very transparent about what you've done. So what we'd like to encourage is all of our teams, for every qualifying tournament they attend, to plan on posting a video that is the match that they scored and submitted as one of their 6. Similarly, we'd like to encourage everybody to sort of do a robot reveal video, do a walk around, show off the cool things in your machine, right? All in the spirit of transparency, right? One of the things we want to make sure is that everybody's in this for the right reason, right? So if your team is really only in this for the trophies, I can hook you up with a trophy vendor, we'll get you that trophy, and we'd ask you to get out of the way of the teams that really want to participate in the program and really believe in the FIRST values. We are going to put together a tagging convention that will allow for quick and easy searching for all of these videos. And we haven't worked out what exactly that means. We figure we got a month or 2 to get that figured, but stay tuned. We think it actually could be a lot of fun and a great way to give some of that learning from other teams' experience back in spite of the needs to be socially distant right now. We are going to need some help. So we are looking for places that are potentially interested and able to do traditional event hosting in person. If we wait till December, it may be too late to try to plan events for January and February. So we'd like to, if possible, identify potential sites now with an idea that we understand that if things aren't allowed to happen in person in January, we'll fall back to the remote event. So if you are able and interested in the January, February timeframe, please drop us an email at ftc@playingatlearning.org. We also likely are going to need more remote event hosts. We haven't figured out what the right size for a remote event should be. And so we will need to figure out potentially more hosts. Currently, we are not anticipating offering the event host advancement option. We want people in this environment to really be hosting for the right reasons. Again, it's similar to that argument about the trophies. We really want people to focus on this is a difficult time and we need to work together. So we're not anticipating having a host advancement slot. Additionally, your host expenses are pretty small. So unlike in prior seasons, it's likely not going to be a good fundraising opportunity for teams. But on the plus side, you don't need a venue. So I know there's been over the years teams that have wished to be able to be hosts and haven't been able to because of their inability to secure a venue. This might be an opportunity to get your feet wet with trying some of the organization of the event. And again, if you're interested and able, please drop us an email, ftc@playingatlearning.org. In terms of the team's costs, right now, event registration with FIRST is the same. So everybody's still going to be paying the $275 per team through the FIRST storefront. FIRST policy on this is non-refundable. So even if you're not able to compete, not able to get into an event, your school tells you, no, you don't get to go to event, it's not refundable. We're likely going to keep the same cost structure for the traditional in-person events. $150 for the first one, $175 for the second one, $200 for the third. Just out of a simple logic that we'll explain here in a little bit. Remote events, we're still working through that. So one of the big challenges Playing at Learning has in this current environment is that a significant portion of our operating expenses come from the event registration fees. So one of the challenges we're facing is how does Playing at Learning stay functional? How do we keep alive through this? So we can't charge zero for the remote events. We're going to have to charge something. But what that something is, we're going to have to spend a little bit more time with spreadsheets figuring out. In general, this is a really challenging time for all nonprofits. Right? We're all sort of in the same boat. Most nonprofits operate on a very thin budget, and everybody in the world right now is focused on making sure they're surviving. A lot of people are out of jobs. So if you have the ability to make a donation to Playing at Learning during this time, it would be greatly appreciated. Or if you know that your company would be interested in potentially sponsoring or providing grants, we would be interested in trying to take advantage of any of those kind of opportunities we can. All right, so I think I've blown through all the things that I know we can share right now. At this point, we're going to start trying to open up into the questions. If we don't get to all the questions tonight, we're going to go through the question log. So when you're typing those questions into the GoToWebinar application, they're all being saved. So we're going to go through the question log, and we will try as much as possible to answer every question. But we do have a sort of a finite amount of time for the evening. And as I mentioned earlier, we are planning for additional town hall meetings, right? As things become better defined, we want to make sure that we're feeding information to you about how it's going to work here, because there's no history to look backwards on in terms of how these remote events are going to work. So we really need to learn quickly and together. All right, how about some questions?
Mark, there's a couple of questions about the engineering notebook. One says, I've heard rumors that there may be a change in the engineering notebook format this year. Do you know anything about it? Is there anything official yet? There's another one mentioning engineering documentation. Is it different from the engineering notebook?
So the judging portion of part 1 of the game manual has not been released yet. Yes, there are some, I wouldn't call them changes to the way the engineering notebook is being structured. There are some additions. So I'll leave it at that and let the actual answers come from what gets released. My understanding is they're currently working on those portions of part 1 of the game manual, and that should be coming out very quickly. I know they had intended to try to get it out by this time frame. Just there's a lot of other things with getting all of the other pieces together and going, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Some of our questions I think you've answered. There was a discussion about, did it require video submissions? I think you've talked about that. There was another question about just sort of walking through what a remote event looks like. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how the scoring system or how we think that's going to work, knowing that it hasn't been released yet?
Um, I don't know if I can. The scoring system and the details that have been released. My challenge is, as part of the game design committee, we're providing some of the feedback on how we think it ought to work, and so I have to dance around what I know is public and what I know isn't yet. The way the scoring system is going to work, the event will be set up in a cloud application. So Playing at Learning, as the program delivery organization, will set up the event. Within the time frame that's defined for the event, the team will need to open up the scoring application and pull their set of matches down, right? So it'll populate their application with a set of matches. They will need to then play those matches one at a time within the time window. So the time window has been described as a week. It's not clear whether it's the week ending on the event or the week beginning on the event. I'd like to propose it should be the week ending on the event, but that part is still somewhat undefined. There are a couple of different modes that the scoring system can be used in. It can be used to do live scoring, just like we do at all of our qualifying tournaments for the last couple of years. You could have a tablet and you could be entering the score as the match is playing, and your team could be having a lot of fun watching the score change as the match progresses. It can also be done with paper score sheets, right? Similar to what we used to do before the live scoring became an option. At which point, at the end of the match, the score sheet would get recorded by a responsible individual, and that would then be entered into the scorekeeping software. There are two modes to how the scorekeeping software gives the information back to FIRST cloud server. In one mode, in the ideal case, the laptop that's running the software is connected to the internet the whole time. And basically, when the scores are submitted at the end of the match, they're automatically uploaded immediately to the FIRST server. The other option is similar to what I've done for the last many years. At the end of all the matches, you take the laptop somewhere where it can be connected to the internet, and there's a upload scores option within the software. So that's the basics on how that side will work. The judging is still an undefined process, right? I know there's a group, including Jill and Annika, that are working on trying to define how the process should work. And so we're going to have to hold off until they publish that.
There's a question about team inspections. Will robots be inspected for competing?
So you can actually see all the inspection rules currently in Game Manual Part 1, remote events. And I think when you notice that there's very, very, very few of them, we're back to looking at this honor system, right? There's not really a way to do inspection for robots in remote events. So we're going to have to rely on the teams to be very honest and open about what they're doing, right? That's that transparency slide I had up, why I'm encouraging everybody to try as much as possible to do a very open job of publishing what their robot is, right? So show me a video of your robot, right? I don't see a better way of communicating out to all the teams that you're working hard at trying to live within the robot construction rules. But it is an honor system, and that is the way that FIRST has asked it to be defined. That said, one of our Ask an Expert sessions is going to be an inspector. And so you'll have an opportunity to be able to ask inspection type questions of an inspector key volunteer to be able to make sure that you do truly understand the rules, right? So that you can live within the constraints that we do put on the teams.
There's a question, can you return to the slide explaining the remote event details?
The remote event very thin details, I'll put it. We don't have a lot of details yet. Even what's described in the part 1 of the game manual is very high level, right? And they did it that way to try to put as much information as they could out for everyone, so that people are sure and aware that something's going to happen this season, without, effectively creating something that can't be morphed or modified or fixed as it's needed to make it viable for everybody.
And while you're on this one, why don't you give a high overview of what we would expect a remote host team to be responsible for?
So the remote host team is going to be responsible for a couple of things. So there are still a bunch of judges that need to be recruited. There's a set of video conferencing sessions that need to be managed, right? So, if you think about it, right, a normal qualifying tournament has, for example, 4 judging rooms. They've got 4 panels of judges. There's 8 judge volunteers, 1 judge advisor. Those people all still need to be identified. Those 4 judging rooms turn into 4 virtual rooms as part of the judging video conferencing. Those need to be managed with teams getting into the right rooms at the right times and being excused out of those rooms when that time is over. There's a judging deliberation room that needs to be managed. There's an award ceremony that needs to be sort of curated, right? So there'll be some pieces that'll be sort of cookie cutter that we'll publish to help make it an easy process. But the going through and having somebody be the voice that announces the teams that are winning the awards, we'd like to still have that happen, right? Celebration is an important part of this experience, and we'd like to see as much celebration as we can.
We have a question about the registration fee being refunded if the event is canceled due to undefeated virus. I'm assuming that means a registration for the event, not for the season.
So we believe that with the remote event structure, there is approximately 0 probability that they wouldn't fit within the shelter-in-place requirements that have been part of the shutdowns during the pandemic, right? So it's not likely that any of the remote events would get canceled. And our plan for the traditional in-person events is that if there is a crisis, they would resolve back to remote events, at which point they would go forward. In that situation, we would likely go ahead and adjust whatever registration fee was paid for the traditional event and refund the part that is in excess of what the remote event fee is. This is a learning experience. We don't have anything to rely on. We're making this up as we're putting it together. So all I would ask is everybody be patient, and we'll figure it out.
We have a couple more questions about the engineering notebook. The engineering notebook is not required to be digital, and the details about the engineering notebook will be out in the next game manual release, I believe, what Mark said.
Yeah, and so the recommendation of Go Digital is not to say that it's a requirement. It's just one way. I mean, at a traditional event, the judges like to look at your notebook. They like to actually thumb through it. At a remote event, short of you needing to ship your engineering notebook to each judge in turn, there's not really a way for them to be able to do that. And so a digital or online notebook is a next best approximation and would give at least some ability for the judges to be able to see the breadth of what you've accomplished.
Let's see. A couple of questions here are very similar. Will there be alliances this season? And maybe along with that, you might add, so we got a question if the game design committee changed the game to be remote, or if the game will be different for remote than in person.
So I will answer the first question about alliances. So remote events do not have alliances. If you've been reading part 1 of the game manual, look closely at the information on rankings and advancement, you probably could have gleaned that pretty well, right? It's pretty well stated there. Remote events do not have alliances. Traditional events still would. And so, if we end up with traditional events in January and February, that will still be alliance-based gameplay. The remote events, it's going to be one robot playing a modified version of the game. So it is the same game, but with some rule changes to accommodate the fact that there is only one robot playing. Right? But it's same game, same everything else. You buy pieces to be able to practice for a remote event, you're going to be able to practice exactly the same way for a traditional event.
Is there any thoughts or guidance on how teams will be able to meet to work on their robots, build software, etc.?
So the truth of that is we're not in a position to be able to provide that guidance, right? That's a question that has a different answer potentially in every school district in the region, right? So, teams need to be looking at what the guidances are for their communities and work with that. I don't think there's going to be an answer that ever, like all the way through the end of this calendar year, I don't think there's going to be ever an answer that fits everywhere. There's going to be different answers in different areas.
Will this result in teams running many rounds and submitting their best 6 results in a given week? Such a model would change the balance between reliability and swinging for the fences.
So I would point back to the conversation about trophies. Teams that think of that as a strategy, all they're interested in is trophies. And if that's all they're interested in, I'll help them connect with a vendor, we'll get some trophies and have them get out of the way of the teams that want to actually have a first tech challenge experience, right? At the end of it all, integrity is what you do when people aren't watching. And I'd like to think that we have a very high level of integrity of the teams here in Northern California.
Will teams be expected to meet in one place for judging interviews, or will they individually log into the judging video conference call?
I believe we're going to see a mix. So for regions that it's okay and acceptable for teams to meet in small group environments, it would be reasonable for them to meet for the judging interview as a group. For teams that are in regions that isn't acceptable, it would be reasonable for them to each be individually connected into the video conference, which is why there need to be volunteers to help manage that.
There was a couple of questions about the advancement. The advancement is slightly different this year. It is in the game manual 1 and the remote game manual as well. And then there's a question that is, do you think the number of competitions or number of people qualifying to regional championship will be the same?
So we are currently planning our regional championship to be the same size. Some of that may depend on whether or not it stays as a traditional event or goes remote. So one of the things that we've been talking about as staff is that a lot of the assumptions about event structure disappear under the remote event format, right? The tournament day schedule is based largely on the number of teams that can play the requisite number of matches within the available amount of time for a day. Well, when there's no connection between the team matches and the actual event day, that assumption's gone, right? So maybe tournaments won't be 16 teams or 28 teams. Maybe they'll be 20 and 30 or 40. I don't have to constrain myself to divide by 4 numbers anymore, right? There's a whole lot of flexibility that comes into it. So it's possible that our championship would get bigger. We're going to start off with planning for the same 56 we did the last couple of years and work from there. Other than that, the advancement structure is identical. The number of teams that advance from a qualifying tournament will depend upon a couple of factors. How many teams do we have and how many qualifying tournaments do we have? Right. So we try to set up so that there's an equitable number of teams from each of those qualifiers. And for those that pay attention to advancement, with the host team option not being on the table currently for remote events, that means there's one additional slot per remote event available for the competing teams.
There are a few people that are asking where are the questions and they can't see them. I don't know. Everyone should be able to see if you open the question window on the side. That's where
Yeah,
there's a
Diane,
chart. If you
they can only see questions that have been answered publicly. So if it was sent privately and there's a little check mark in what you see as an organizer, that is not necessarily a public answer.
but can they see the questions?
No, only when they're answered and answered publicly.
Got
and
it.
we will take the log of questions and literally we will group them into same question sections, and the same answers that are being given here will be published in that list of questions on the website. Right. Our goal is to try to give everybody as much information as we can.
We've had a few people ask how many events can a team register?
So first policy for advancement is teams can only advance at the first 3 events they attend. So our policy in Northern California has been to interpret that as no more than 3. So we're going to hold to that again, right? We're concerned. One of the odd things that's happened this year is the potential for FIRST robotics competition teams to decide to do FTC instead of FRC this year. So we've already had, I think there's more than a dozen teams out of one FRC team that are currently about to pop up. Right? I've been trying to figure out what's going to happen to the total number of teams we have. Our registration currently is running at almost 90% of normal. And that's before that additional 25% teams pop in. So we're concerned about event capacity. We're not likely going to end up with too many events. It's likely we're going to be scrambling to add enough events to support everybody. Just from an annual planning perspective, we try to provide all the teams on average across the region somewhere between 2 and 2.5 plays per team. Right? So if a team doesn't want to play a lot, they don't have to. If a team wants to play a lot, they can get maybe 3 plays. So that's typically our goal, is to try to provide enough space for that.
Will teams participating in remote events be able to see the score matches from other participating teams?
And I don't know the answer to that question yet. So this version of the scoring software that they're writing has never been done before. And so there's some of those kind of questions will come out of the early prototypes. I'm hoping that we're going to have information for you. I think it would be a lot of fun to be able to see that, right? To know, what's it looking like for my tournament? Can I see the rankings for my tournament right now? Right, that's something that's an interesting thing for everybody to look at. So I don't have the answer to that one yet. When we get it, we'll share it.
We do have a note. There are great resources on the FTC Share and Learn Facebook page on how to work remotely. So I think that's been posted so people can see it. There's a question about when is our next town hall going to be?
Probably relatively soon. A lot of it depends upon whether or not there's more information to share. So, as an example, if the judging manuals get published, we might, judging portions of Game Manual Part 1 get published, we might look at, okay, let's try to do a town hall and let an opportunity to share as much as we know about that, right? So we don't have a fixed schedule. We'd like to do them often enough so that the information's flowing in a timely way to you, but not so often that they become sort of mundane.
Which goes right along with when will the next game manual be released? Is it Game Manual Part 2 or will there be one before then?
So the game manual is divided into 2 sections, Part 1 and Part 2. First traditionally tries to release Part 1 in the middle of July each year. The next section, Part 2, isn't released until the day of the game release. So that would be September 12th. There may be updates to Part 1 between now and then, and that's where for example, the judging information would come into view, right, in one of those updates. And similar to the share and learn, one of the things we didn't talk about that's likely going to also happen is we're likely not going to have a live kickoff this year. It's likely going to be an online kickoff. One of the things we've traditionally done at our kickoff is workshops. So we're anticipating creating a resource on our website that would allow all of our teams to put together resources to share with the rest of our teams. So watch for that.
There's some questions about what we expect an in-person event to look like. Are they required to go to opening ceremony, for example? So you might talk about some modifications that we might see for an in-person event.
Yeah, I mentioned a handful. We don't know, right? So that's just it. If there's too many constraints, it's likely we would lean backwards towards treating it as a remote event again, right? But my crystal ball has gotten a little fuzzy and it's not working very well these days. I don't have a good sense of what we're going to be looking at come December, January, right? You know, with a little luck, maybe things have settled some and things are in a better state. I don't know. I think as a general philosophy, we're not going to force people to do things. Again, we've talked a little bit as part of our staff discussions of how do we deal with a team backing out of an event? So in the case of a traditional event, an in-person event, if a team declines over health concerns, how do we deal with that? And we don't have answers. We have thoughts, and we'd like to spend a little bit more time thinking about it before we produce answers.
What are some ways that judging outreach might change? Most of the outreach events our team has done in past years were in person.
And I would wait till you get a little bit more guidance from the judging community. And so the judges are going to be looking for information, but you know, as an example, outreach could be something you do via Zoom, right? There's no reason that couldn't be an outreach type activity. You know, get on Zoom and connect with the Boys and Girls Club and show the kids there what you're working on. Talk to them about what they're working on. Help them foster a team, right? There still are communication that can happen that could be viewed as outreach that doesn't require being in person.
Our kickoff date is September 12th, and as Mark said, it will be a virtual kickoff.
It's likely we're going to dovetail and wrap around a national level kickoff. So in years past, Ken Johnson, the director of FTC for FIRST, has typically gone to somebody's kickoff that has streaming capabilities, and they've streamed something from there. That obviously isn't likely going to work this year. So FIRST is putting something together. What that's going to look like, I don't know yet. But so what we'll probably do is try to wrap our schedule around their schedule.
A few of our questions are things we've mentioned we don't know. One comment is the toughest part for teams may be how they can get together to actually build a robot under shelter in place. And I think that's something that we all can sympathize with, that is going to be very dependent on your team, your school, your district, your parents, however to put that together. But it's certainly potentially going to be one of those challenges.
It definitely will be. There are steps that could be taken to make it maybe a little bit more manageable, but it's going to be a challenging environment. And we just encourage you to be creative, put on your thinking cap and figure out what you can do.
We have a question about virtual workshops on the day of kickoff.
So we're probably not going to try to force the virtual workshops to be the day of kickoff. What we'd like to do is think about going ahead and pre-recording. And at that point, every team can take advantage of it regardless of schedule, right? So that's kind of what I was trying to describe with, we're going to create a page on our website that allows team-generated workshop resources to be shared out to the rest of the teams. So maybe it's a video, maybe it's a slide deck, maybe it's a manual, maybe it's a way to sign up for online Zoom sessions that you're going to help teams with, right? There's a bunch of different kinds of things that could be done.
Mark, do you know when the robot controller app for the ultimate goal will be released on GitHub?
I would guess that they'll do something that's not game specific relatively soon, but I haven't seen schedules for that. The game specific portions won't get released until after kickoff, right? It may be simultaneous with kickoff, but won't happen before kickoff.
We've just about run out of questions.
Well, I appreciate everyone taking some time to join tonight. We had a lot of people on the call. It's wonderful that people are paying attention and interested to try to find out what's going on. This is a learning process for everybody. It's been a huge headache. So again, I would ask for everybody's patience and support as we try to figure this all out. Again, our big goal is a first experience for as many teams and students as we can manage. And then the recording of this video should end up on our website. Exactly where isn't known yet. It likely will be a page that has town hall or something like that in its descriptions. So it should be relatively easy to identify.
One thing I would like to give a plug for is FIRST is releasing a new mentor match feature. Mentors can indicate their availability to work with teams. So if your team is interested in getting more mentors, you can look for that on the FIRST website. It's called the FIRST Mentor Match. And it's like you put in maybe a specific request for a software person on these days, or this is when you're planning to meet or need help. And they're trying to help get adults in to be mentors and teams that need them to match. If you are interested in preparing a workshop for our kickoff, if you're interested in being a remote host or being an in-person host, if you think that might be something that you would have an event space for after the new year, send an email to ftc@planeatlearning.org. Mark, you might want to go back to our contact information slide.
Yep, I can do that.
At the end, either of those, send it to Mark or I directly, or ftc@planeatlearning goes to both of us. So if you have if you have a play space, a field that you would be willing to open for another team to come and record their remote match events, if you have a way to open that for other people safely and disinfecting things, be sure to let us know and we will compile some of that material.
So we're what, about 6 weeks from kickoff? So it's getting close.
Everybody wants to know what's the ultimate goal.
Time will tell. Maybe the ultimate goal is life, the universe, and everything.
This challenge is definitely going to be an ultimate goal. We're pretty sure there's at least one vote for a water game.
The ultimate goal is to get through the pandemic season successfully.
Yep. And several coaches or mentors have given appreciation for hosting this kind of meeting. We will continue to do this as we know information. If you are on this call, you probably got the invite through a Google group website or Google group email group. please share that information with your other coaches, parents, mentors. Maybe if you have a new mentor on your team, be sure that they get signed up for the email group. You can do that at the top of our webpage, norcalftc.org. There's a button to click to join that group. That's the best way for us to communicate out to our community. We're also looking at utilizing more blog posts on our webpage, so you can always go to the webpage and see what information is new there. I don't see any more new questions.
Oh, we can hang for a couple minutes more. Other than that, we could go ahead and wrap it up. If you do have questions that we didn't get out of you tonight, do feel free to go ahead and mail those to ftc@playingatlearning.org, and we will do our best to add those questions to the log. The goal is to give you everything we can information-wise.
And just to reiterate, this presentation will be, and the recording will be put on our website. When it is posted there and available, I will also email that out to the Google group so that you're all aware that it's available and where to find it. There's one question. Can we share this slide deck? I'm assuming that we're sharing it with you. You may share it with whoever else you feel may be benefit.
Yeah, there is nothing in this slide deck that is confidential or protected. Absolutely, the more we share, the more confident people can be in decisions they make about participation this year. And last comment is for my key volunteers that were part of the call here. Me putting you on the introduction slide was a nudge that we might be leaning on you to help with some of the Ask an Expert calls. So be prepared. There's always a little bit of take when there's a little bit of give.
There's one last question. For teams who might have fields that we can make available to other teams, what are the requirements? How big does the building need to be, or do we need to have disinfectants?
So this is exactly why we want to go through a vetting process. And so rather than trying to broadcast that, we recognize it's probably going to be somewhat specific to the region you're in and what constraints your region has and what kind of a facility it is. So I'd rather have somebody say, hey, we're interested, and then we'll have a conversation about what they've got and what might work. All right, Santa Clara County has one set of rules right now that would basically require sanitizing the field between uses. So one group would come in and it would need to be completely sanitized. So we will figure that out as we go.
Mark, do you want to share any thoughts on how some of our Ask an Expert sessions might look?
So it's sort of the anticipation is it would be, instead of a session like this where you all are muted, it would be more like maybe a Zoom meeting with an opportunity to be able to, for example, put the camera on the computer screen or share the computer screen so the FTA or CSA can look and see what you're having trouble with. Be able to point the camera at the robot and be able to talk about what you're having issues with. The referee sessions might be a lot more like this, just a question and answer session. Inspector sessions, let's take a look at the robot again, right? So I don't know what the right answer is, and it may evolve as we try a few things and decide what works and what doesn't. But again, the goal is to provide those learning opportunities that the teams aren't going to have through attending events this year.
Mark, how do you think the Ask a Referee would be different than submitting an official Q&A?
So the big difference would be submitting an official Q&A gets you an official answer. Ask a Referee allows you to understand a little bit about and have a discussion with, similar to what you would do in the question box at a tournament, right? So a lot of times teams will come to the question box at a tournament, not to ask a question about a specific match, but to try to understand more about the rules. Is it okay when I do this? What happens if I do that? right? So those kind of questions would be appropriate. But again, never having done this before, we're going to find out. Plus, I wanted something to find for my referees to do. They're all going to be kind of bored. We as referee volunteers aren't working any of the remote events. We're out of jobs until we get back to traditional events.
Our referees will need to just go watch some videos and see how exciting the gameplay is.
Exactly. Well, we are at 8 o'clock. Since we don't really have any other questions coming in and we're just sort of chit-chatting, let's go ahead and just consider this a wrap up for the evening. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hopefully this was informative and useful. We will talk to you at the next town hall meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Annika,